Well, as I said, our theme today is magic, and every good magician sets the stage. When we talk about property rights, we tend to think immediately of real estate or things that we can own, but it actually goes far deeper than that. Property rights goes immediately back to your person, and that's very important to understand. Just because you don't have money, just because you don't own land, doesn't mean you don't have property rights. You are your own property. If the government can control you, then you are not free. That is the concept that we need to absolutely understand today. As a matter of fact, there's a gentleman by the name of Wayne Hagee, or there was, he passed away a number of years ago. He fought an epic battle with the federal government over water rights on his property. This is a property rights battle. It went back and forth for years. He went to jail for a little while over some of this. Different courts came down with different rulings. But as a result, in the thick of that battle, Wayne Hagee in 1992 said this. He said, either you have a right to own property or you are property. That pretty much sums it up. Now, property rights are the cornerstone on which our society here in the United States is based. They were something that was very important to the Founding Fathers because they understood the principle that I just illuminated, which is that if the government can control you, if the government can control everything that you own, you are not free. There are two concepts that are actually fundamental to a free and prosperous society, and the United States has, over the last 250 years, been the freest and most prosperous society on earth, arguably. Those two concepts are individualism and private property, and they go together, as we're going to understand more and more throughout this talk. Property rights not only make the person who lives in the shack on a half an acre equal to the person who lives on 40 acres on a great big estate in a chateau, they make this person able to become that person. The person who lives in the shack can begin to leverage the half an acre that he has to build a business, to do all sorts of other things, so that eventually he can own the mansion on the 40 acres. If we don't have property rights, we are dependent on the government to give us whatever they see fit. There's no guarantee that you're ever going to get there, and probably you won't ever get to the mansion on the 40 acres. You're more likely to remain the person in the shack on the half an acre, and you probably won't even own the half an acre. That'll belong to the government too. That's really also very important, that again, if the government owns everything, you control nothing. Private property rights then are also important because they provide a block on the government. It is a stumbling block to their total control. If you own things, if you are in possession of yourself, if they can't control you and what you own, they can't control everything. That keeps government in check. So private property rights are really important from a variety of different standpoints. Well, there are some important questions that we have to answer today. First of all, where are we headed in terms of property rights? How did we get on this road? Is there any value in the current direction that we're headed in? And what are the implications of maintaining our current course? And we're going to start with those right at the top and go through them one by one. First of all, where are we headed? Well, my friends, as David alluded to in his introduction today, this is where we're headed. We reject the idea of private property. This is a quote by a man by the name of Peter Burley, who's a former New York State Assemblyman. He's a former commissioner of the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. He's a former president of the National Audubon Society and a former board member of the Sierra Club. This is a guy with credentials, and he has been in pretty much every aspect of things that you can imagine: state government, non-governmental organizations or special interest groups, very powerful special interest groups. And he's just one guy who holds that view. There are many, many more like him, including right here in the state of Wisconsin, working to implement that concept. We reject the idea of private property, and it has infiltrated pretty much every aspect of policy that you can think of. How did we get here? Well, every magic trick has 3 acts. For those of you who've seen the movie The Prestige, you'll be familiar with this. But every magic trick consists of 3 parts or acts. The first part is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary: a deck of cards, a bird, or a man, Perhaps he asks you to inspect it to see if it is indeed real, unaltered, normal. But of course, it probably isn't. So what is the pledge we're talking about in this case? Well, it's a noble idea, the idea of sustainable development. And here's where it started. The concept actually started earlier, but the term sustainable development was popularized by something called the Brundtland Commission, which met between 1984 and 1987. It was not an official UN commission, but it was very tightly tied to the UN. And it was headed, it's named after the woman who headed it, who chaired it, Gro Harlem Brundtland, who's a two-time former prime minister of Norway. On that committee for the United States was Bill Ruckelshaus, who many of you may know as the first administrator of the EPA. He served under Richard Nixon in that position, and then again under Ronald Reagan a few years later. Sustainable development was sort of coined there and popularized as a result of that commission. Well, what is their definition? What was the Brundtland Commission's definition of sustainable development? Here it is in a nutshell. And again, David alluded to this earlier. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That sounds noble. It sounds responsible. It sounds wonderful. Who wouldn't want to get on board with that? Well, it looks even better. And those of you who saw my talk on green tier last year may remember these three circles. These are the 3 E's of sustainable development, and this is how sustainable development advocates love to convey the idea of sustainable development. You have 3 interlocking circles. You've got ecological integrity, economic prosperity, and social equity, and when they interlock, supposedly they create a sustainable life that is viable, bearable, and equitable. The question is, does that model stand up? And we're going to find out. Well, after the Brundtland Commission, a few years after the Brundtland Commission met, there was a great big summit, the United Nations Earth Summit, that met down in Rio de Janeiro. And they developed something called the Program of Action from Rio. And a lot of people know this by another name, Agenda 21. But it's a big book. Actually, you can order it online and get a hard copy of it. I have my own, so I can reference it whenever I like. It was soft law policy. That means it didn't actually have any force of law in any of the nations that signed on to it. And there were 172 nations, including the United States, that signed on to this plan. The idea was to take this soft law policy, which was supposed to be implemented from a global all the way down to a state and local level, take it back to the respective nations that signed on, and roll out a program of hard policy to get it implemented in those countries. That's when it gets teeth, my friends. Not just by signing on to it, as George H.W. Bush did for the United States in 1992, but by implementing hard policy, laws, regulations, etc. That's where it gains its teeth. Well, what did the Program of Action have to say about private property rights? Because if we're going to sign on to a document that big, if we're going to commit ourselves to implementing hard policy here in the United States to carry out this plan, we ought to know what it says about property rights. Well, here's what it says. Right out of the Program of Action from Rio. Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is the principal instrument of accumulation and concentration of wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice. How many of you are property owners in the room today? Did you know that you're evil? Congratulations, you're just big meanies and you're preventing other people from having things. So let's unpack this a little bit more. What can we glean from this quote? First of all, those who are pushing sustainable development believe that resources are limited, or they want you to believe resources are limited. And they also want you to believe that human beings are squandering those resources. Private property rights are socially unjust because if you have something, it means somebody else can't have it. So really nobody should have anything except a handful of elites, right? I mean, that's where we're going. The needs of the community supersede the interests of the individual. That contributes to social injustice. That's what we're talking about. That's communitarianism. Now, communitarianism basically says this, that you as an individual have no right to have your needs, wants, desires met until the needs of everyone in the community have been met. I'd like you to try to imagine just for a moment if it's possible to have the needs of everybody just in this room met simultaneously. Can anybody imagine that? No. So what this boils down to is this. You as an individual under this program are never going to have your needs met. You as an individual must always subject yourself to the needs, the greater needs of the community. And that means whatever somebody else says, the elite class says you should believe is the greater needs of the community. So what are the true aims of sustainable development then? Here's the reality. It's remaking government, eliminating private property, and transforming the economy. That is where we're headed. And you notice that I've got a statue of David there with a fig leaf. That's the environmentalism that is tacked on to sustainable development. That's what that really is. It is a fig leaf for this agenda. Okay? So again, if we go back to those three circles, here's what they really are. Ecological integrity is actually regulatory control. Economic prosperity is actually crony capitalism, and social equity is actually redistribution of your wealth on a massive, massive scale, making for an unsustainable life that is non-viable, inequitable, and unbearable. National implementation. Okay, so George H.W. Bush signs this thing for the United States, the Program of Action from Rio. It was sort of towards the end of his term in office. And what we're going to see now is that this is an equal opportunity disease, my friends. It is not just Democrats, it's not just Republicans, it's not conservatives, it's not liberals. They're both jumping on this bandwagon. And President Clinton, after he got into office, picked up the ball that George H.W. Bush had to put down, and he ran with it. And the first thing he did is develop something called the President's Council on Sustainable Development, which met from 1993 to 1999. This is where we start to get the hard policy implemented. We're going from soft law to hard law now. Well, what did that plan look like, and how did it work? Well, let's look at another first-hand source, primary source. Presidential Executive Order 12852, which established the President's Council on Sustainable Development in 1993, says this: there is established the President's Council on Sustainable Development, which shall consist of not more than 25 members to be appointed by the President from the public and private sectors, and who represent industrial, environmental, governmental, and not-for-profit organizations with experience relating to matters of sustainable development. Now, let's unpack this one a little bit more, too. First of all, it ended up being more like 35 people that were on that council, but close enough. And it included representatives from every single cabinet-level agency you can think of. Everything from the EPA, the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, right on down to the Department of Education. And those people representing their agencies on this council were told, you figure out how to get this rolled out through your agency. Whatever it takes, whatever programs you need to implement, figure out creative ways to get this program rolled out and get it enacted into policy. Also, right within the language here, we see some things that I want to bring to your attention. Appointed. Anytime you see the word appointed, you should be frightened. You should be very concerned, because those are people you can't get rid of. They are being appointed to make decisions about your life, but you do not get a say, and you cannot get rid of them. Second, industrial, environmental, governmental, and not-for-profit organizations, people from both the public and private sectors. This is the bare bones of the scam that was going to get run on you through sustainable development. And we're going to look at exactly how that appears. This is a model of public-private partnership. That's the wording in that quote from the executive order. That's what this is. It's called more efficient government. It's a big fad now. Actually, we do a lot of this right here in Wisconsin, not just at the federal level, at the state level. It's called more efficient government because it is. Government's always more efficient if it doesn't have to trip over your needs, wants, desires, will as the people. If it can cut you out of the mix, it gets a lot more efficient. Here's how it works. Government brings force to the table. They have the power to make you do things. Business brings money to the table. And the NGOs, or the special interest groups, bring the agenda. And together, they start making the decisions behind closed doors. You will get invited to consensus building sessions. You will get invited to visioning sessions. You'll get invited to all these charming little things, and they'll have big pads of paper and magic markers, and you get to write your ideas on and tear the sheets off and hand them in, and you think that your feedback is actually going to make a difference. In fact, it's a show. It's a big, big magic show. And really what's happening is that all of the people in this triangle have already made the decisions, and the only reason they're inviting you to comment at all is so that when you start to complain about the decisions they've made later, they can say this: well, but you participated in the process. You were there. You gave us feedback. This is what you all wanted. It's a lie. The whole point of PPPs is to silence you, the public, you, the people. Anytime you see this kind of structure, again, you should be worried. It shouldn't exist because essentially this is undermining your voice as the people. It is undermining the representative style of government that our founding fathers established for us, which works very well when it's allowed to work. So one of the first things that happened once this President's Council on Sustainable Development got underway is that the Department of Housing and Urban Development led the way on getting the American Planning Association involved. They paid the American Planning Association to develop a rollout plan for sustainable development across the United States. And one of the key parts of that plan was it's not a great image, but you can sort of see it a little bit. They developed a book called Growing Smart, a legislative guidebook. And essentially what this was it was filled with all the principles and ideals and everything that, you know, sustainable development was supposed to be aiming for, along with template legislation, boilerplate legislation. So this started to be taught, these principles, these ideals started to be taught literally in every single planning department at every single college and university across the United States. This is all that's taught anymore, is smart growth, growing smart. That's it. That's what you get. So the people who are coming out of urban development programs or urban planning programs, that sort of thing, this is what they know now. There is no alternative being taught. Okay? The American Planning Association are leading proponents of sustainable development, and essentially they were the ones who took us from soft policy to hard policy because they laid out that boilerplate template, the template legislation essentially. You'll find this book on every single urban planner's shelf, on every single county planner, state planner, municipal planner, doesn't matter. It's going to be on their shelf. Nobody's without it now. Do all planners know the truth? No, they don't, because some of them have never known anything else. So they don't really understand fully what they're participating in and the ways in which they are contributing to the undermining of a system that keeps us free. However, some of them do. This is a quote by a gentleman by the name of J. Gary Lawrence, it's part of a speech that he gave to a UN environment program in Great Britain in 1998. And he said, participating in a UN advocated planning process would very likely bring out many who would actively work to defeat any elected official who did so. So we will call our process something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. So what do you see there, my friends? We see that they understand that if we know what this is, we're not going to like it. So they have to cloak it. They have to pretend it's something else in order to get us to bite. J. Gary Lawrence was also the former chief planner for the city of Seattle. That's why I'm saying some of the planners do know. He's a former director for the Center for Sustainable Communities at the University of Washington and a current vice president and chief sustainability officer for a large company that does sustainable development consulting projects. Okay? So right in one individual you see public-private partnership. Every single point of the triangle is represented in this one person. A few more sustainability movers and shakers, and I'm just going to blow through this very quickly, but the thing that I want you to notice in particular is these ones that are in red here. These are trade organizations for elected officials, and they've all been thoroughly co-opted for the Sustainable Development Agenda. Everything from the National Governors Association, which is actually meeting in Milwaukee this coming weekend, National Association of County Administrators, U.S. Mayor's Conference, and the National League of Cities, which in Wisconsin, the chapter here is called the League of Wisconsin Municipalities. All of those trade organizations lock, stock, and barrel for sustainable development at this point. Well, once we started to roll out across the United States, we started to roll out in Wisconsin. And we had some very good helpers in Wisconsin to make that happen. And again, you'll see it's an equal opportunity disease because we had both a Republican and a Democratic governor being the two biggest helpers to get this plan enacted. Under Tommy Thompson, we put into place the Stewardship Fund, which went from it started in 1989 and it's gone all the way to the present. Smart Growth started, the mandate was passed in 1999, still going on today. Green Tier piloted under Tommy Thompson and passed into permanent law under James Doyle. The Working Lands Initiative, which we're also going to talk quite a bit about today, 2009 that was passed, and that's still firmly in place. So we have, and this is just a short list, but we have a number of big ticket items here that have moved the sustainable agenda, sustainable development agenda forward in Wisconsin, is what I'm trying to say. State and local sustainable development pathways. Again, I'm going to blow through this very quickly, but at the top of the list, grant money. Holy mackerel, gang, when your city government, when your county government, when your state government is considering taking money, grant money, tell them not to do it because there are always strings attached to that money. Nothing is ever free. I know that cities and counties in particular are often strapped for cash. They want grants that they can use to do projects. They get excited about that. But it's not worth it. And you need to be talking to your elected officials at the local level and discouraging them from taking these monies. I see Bill Pohl now nodding his head over here because this is the fact. There is never a grant that doesn't have strings attached to it. Again, some other things to watch out for: comprehensive planning and smart growth, which we're going to talk about, Farmland Preservation Program, the Working Lands Initiative, conservation easements, redevelopment. This is a biggie now. Everybody loves to do redevelopment. Historic preservation is an in. Open space initiatives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Every single one of these has an impact on your private property rights, has a direct connection or an indirect connection, and it's all bad. So really, we all need to be paying attention. Well, okay, is there any value in sustainable development? If we're going to go to all this effort to implement this, if we've gone this far down the road already, is there any value in it that we can possibly glean, that we could maybe hold on to? That question deserves an answer. Well, let's look at smart growth as an example, which is known by a number of other names, including comprehensive planning, which is how it's most often referred to here in Wisconsin, smart growth or comprehensive planning. Well, we have our pledge. Now we're at the second act of the magic trick. The turn. The magician takes the ordinary something and he makes it do something extraordinary. So here we have smart growth, sustainable development as our pledge. Now we're going to make it do something extraordinary. What does sustainable development advocates say that smart growth is going to do for us? Well, they claim it's wise long-range planning for future growth and that it's going to impede global warming, that it will reduce infrastructure costs, that it will promote community, and that it will preserve farmland. Let's take these one by one. Does smart growth impede global warming? No, it does not. And I've got a great study to share with you to prove it. In 2007, the Residential Development Council of Australia dug into some conservation atlas findings regarding actually the 5 biggest capital cities in Australia. The study was done with certain assumptions. It was largely planners and conservationists that did the study. And they went in believing that lower population density, greater distances from the core, which is the densest part of the city. This is part of smart growth comprehensive planning, as you may know, is to prevent something called urban sprawl. They want to densify things. They don't want things spilling out into the suburbs. They don't like that. So detached housing, more automobile use, they thought all of these things would lead to an increase in greenhouse gas emissions. And in fact, what the study found is that they were wrong in every single case. There was a decrease rather than an increase in relationship to these items. Let's look a little closer. Here we have the 5 cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Adelaide, and Perth. And at the core, look at the readings: 30.05 in Sydney, Melbourne, 28.03. You see these big numbers for greenhouse gas emissions in tons per capita. That's per capita. That's really important. We're not just talking about moving greenhouse gases around. We're talking about how much is being produced per capita. Okay? And at the core, what you find is that they're producing more greenhouse gases per capita than at the very outer area of the city. Look at this significant drop, almost cutting in half those figures. So densifying the cities doesn't seem to work in the way that sustainable development advocates would have you believe in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, they looked at some other consumption figures just to be on the safe side. So here you have your greenhouse gas emissions again. Water use they looked at in liters. That also was less the further you went out from the core. The total eco footprint, lowest at the very outermost part of the city, not at the core where the sustainable development folks say that it should be. Well, here's the problem, is that zoning, according to comprehensive planning smart growth, it's based on false assumptions, it turns out, and yet those false assumptions, doing policy based on those false assumptions has other consequences that are not so good. Just one example, when you increase density, you're also going to increase property values, property costs, and property taxes. Now you're beginning to understand why some of the people in government, for example, might like this, or why some of the special interests in business might like this, because they potentially get more money out of this in the cities, right? Because if you put a premium, if you're densifying, if you're shoving all of these people into the cities, then the value of land goes up because it's at a premium. It's hard to get, right? So then you get more tax revenue, all sorts of things like that. That unfortunately doesn't work out so well for you. If you need to live in the city, good luck finding something affordable. Good luck when it comes time to pay your taxes. This is at least one consequence. There are others, and I hope that at some point you will take a look. We're going to blow through the rest of this now, but there are many consequences to these bad policies made on false assumptions. Does smart growth shrink infrastructure costs? Do you think? No! There's a great paper that was also done in 2007 by a guy named Bent Flivberg. It's quite a name. And what he found, looking at not only previous work that he had done, but that colleagues of his had done in this area, is that planners regularly employ something called strategic misrepresentation, and that they gloss over high costs, ongoing costs, cost-benefit analysis. That's where all the cost is. So when they're coming to you with these wonderful plans about how sustainable development is going to reduce your infrastructure costs, what are they doing? They're lying. They're lying. Strategic misrepresentation is lying. Voila, watch your money disappear. Okay? So no, it does not reduce infrastructure costs. Does smart growth promote community? No! Here's the magic formula that they are using to get to this, okay? Physical and or spatial elements, when arranged properly, when everything's decorated the right way, I guess, produces harmonious social order, more civically minded people, and an enhanced quality of life. Well, that's magical. It's magical, isn't it? There's another name for that. It's social engineering. And here are some examples of it through history. Chicago, Illinois, and Washington, D.C. were both designed along city beautiful lines. This came out of the Beaux-Arts movement in Europe. So when you go to Paris and you see all the grand buildings and the broad boulevards and et cetera, that's Beaux-Arts. And this City Beautiful was basically based on Beaux-Arts. Chicago and Washington, D.C., two of the highest crime rate cities in the United States. Do you think for one moment that City Beautiful created more civically minded people in these two cities? No, you can't beat human nature. Human nature is human nature. It doesn't matter what you do. People are still people, right? And I'll tell you another thing. To create this and to create what they did in Paris, they had to destroy whole neighborhoods and move people out to the suburbs in order to get the look that they wanted. They destroyed a lot of lives and a lot of livelihoods to accomplish this look that they wanted, that they believed was going to make people more civically minded. When people get forcibly relocated, do you think they get more civically minded? I think they get resentful. Greendale, Wisconsin, designed along something called Garden Cities lines. I'm sure Greendale's a lovely place. I seriously doubt that the design of its city has anything to do with its crime rate or the engagement of its citizens in government. Newtown, St. Charles, Missouri. This is what it looks like now. Notice, however, that it's changing, right? It looks different in every single era. This is another problem with this idea. What is the look that creates the civically minded person? Apparently it changes. Newtown, here you have these narrow setbacks and the porches. Everybody's going to be sitting out on their porch and talking to their neighbors. Isn't this wonderful? Everything's walkable. You can get to everything. You don't ever have to get in your car. God forbid that you should have to use your car. Newtown, I'm sure, again, a lovely community. I can't imagine that there is any correlation between narrow setbacks and a lower crime rate. Minneapolis is my favorite example. How many of you recognize this building, Cedar Square West, from Minneapolis? You might actually, more of you might remember it than you think from television. This is the building that Mary Tyler Moore supposedly moved into after she moved out of Phyllis's house. When I was going to school in the Twin Cities in the 1980s, this building, which was a utopian project, actually only a small part of it was ever built because it was too expensive to implement the whole thing. But when this building when I was going to school in the Twin Cities, this building had two nicknames. It was called the Crack Stacks and Ghetto in the Sky. So again, how successful was that project? It finally did get cleaned up in the 90s, but it had nothing to do with people suddenly becoming more civically minded. It had everything to do with increased police presence. So that's how that goes. Well, next question, does smart growth preserve farmlands? No. Surprise. Better question. Fooled you. Do we actually need to preserve farmland? And the answer is not really. Let's look at a few statistics. This is probably going to be hard for you to see, so I'm going to walk you through this as best I can. This is a pie chart of the total surface area of the United States by land cover use as of 2007. The latest figures aren't out yet, but this will do us pretty well. What you'll see is that most of this, 70% of it nationally, is in agricultural use of one kind or another. Cropland, rangeland, forest land, pasture land, other rural lands. Lots of agricultural use, 70% is significant. 20% of available cropland is actually, 20% of that 70%, is cropland. And then 40% of that is cultivated. 60% of available cropland is uncultivated. So we're not even using everything that's available. Why do we need to preserve? Only 6% of the entire United States is developed land. 6%. Minor. In Wisconsin, developed lands in 1982 were 5% of our total area. In 2007, they were 7.5%, which is definitely, there's some growth there, but it's not far off the national figure. And we've still got plenty of room in Wisconsin. Again, total surface area in the United States, about 2 billion acres. Is what I think we're talking about here. And of that, wow, only 6% developed. So we're not in any danger here, folks. There are programs here under the Working Lands Initiative that want us to believe that we are in trouble and that we should worry and worry and worry and do all of these extreme measures to make sure that we're preserving farmland. There are a couple of tax credit-based programs under the Working Lands Initiative that I want to talk about just very briefly. First of all, the agricultural enterprise area. Essentially, this is where a bunch of landowners in like contiguous, it has to be contiguous land, and it can incorporate areas that aren't necessarily signed on, but essentially a local community in conjunction with agricultural producers or farmers and special interest groups. They all get together and they figure out what the boundaries of this agricultural enterprise area should be. And then they put in an application with the Department of Agricultural Trade and Consumer Protection, or DATCAP, to be an official agricultural enterprise area. Now, what is this? Because you know what? You don't actually get anything out of this. Well, this is another layer of zoning. This is more smart growth on top of smart growth on top of smart growth. It's controlling land more and more and more and more and more. You don't actually get any tax credit for being part of an agricultural enterprise area. You still, as an independent landowner, have to enter something called a Farmland Preservation Agreement. And the Farmland Preservation Agreement will give you somewhere between $5 and $10 an acre in tax credits based on where you are in relationship to the agricultural enterprise area, and also in relationship to any farmland preservation zoning that your local community may have determined, I guess. So essentially, Farmland Preservation Agreements start at 15 years. You have to commit 15 years where the government gets to tell you, the state government gets to tell you what you can and can't do with your land. That's where it starts, okay? 15 years. So if you're a cash-strapped farmer and you get into one of these Farmland Preservation Agreements, well, you can get out of it if you're really desperate, if you need to sell some land or whatever, you need to do something different with it. But then you're going to pay through the nose. There's a conversion fee that's very, very steep to get back control of your property. So this is crazy. And in addition, a lot of times they're paying farmers not to grow anything on their land. Okay, so again, I wish I had more time to talk about this, but at least you get a basic idea. Here is a map that's showing you at least a little bit. The tan areas are agricultural enterprise areas that have already been established around the state, some of them pretty large and significant. And then the blue-purple areas are where you've got farmland zoning of some sort in different counties around the state. And now for the pièce de résistance, what I like to call the Conservation Easement Magic Act. The conservation easement is not a normal easement. In a normal easement, you are contracting with somebody to allow them to use your property in some way for a specified amount of time, generally speaking. With the conservation easement, what's happening instead is that your development rights from your property are getting separated from your real property. So when you enter into these agreements with DATCAP, with the state of Wisconsin, essentially what's happening is that you are creating property, you're diminishing the value of your property. When you enter into these are in perpetuity. it's forever. What you can get out of a farmland preservation agreement, you can't get out of a conservation easement. And tons of money has been set aside, again, in this biennial budget for the government to be able to purchase conservation easements. So your money as taxpayers is being used against you to buy up property that will never again be developable. Now, according to these conservation easements, if there's already farming going on the property, you can continue to farm. However, there's also all sorts of other stuff that goes on. For example, if you have a barn that's decrepit on your property and you want to be able to tear down that barn and build a new one to replace it, good luck. Because the conservation easement agreement will specify that while that barn can stay as it is as long as it lasts, once you tear it down, you can't rebuild it. You won't be able to do things with trees on your property. There are certain other things like mowing. There may be areas of your land you won't be able to mow. There are all kinds of things that suddenly you won't be able to do. You have no development rights on your property. You will never be able to deal with it as your own property again. Because now the person who holds the development rights is the government. They get the say. Okay? And essentially what this does, it drops the property value, and you're never going to be able to sell your property. Who wants to buy property that you can't do anything with? You're literally creating pre-acquisition terms for the government or for private land trusts. That's the only buyers for your property now. And again, it's never again going to be able to be developable. This is insidious, absolutely insidious, and that our state government continues to participate in this kind of program is really frightening. Watch carefully. Here are your property rights before conservation easement. Presto, changeo, your property rights after conservation easement. You might have a car, but you ain't going anywhere in it. That's how it works. Well, what are the implications of all of this? What should we understand? This is what we need to understand. Sustainable development cannot live with property rights. They are mutually exclusive. If we want property rights, then sustainable development is something we have to push back against with every fiber of our being. We have to root out the policies at the state and local level that are pushing this, that are keeping it in place, that are advancing it, and we've got to roll it back. Essentially, O is for oligarchy. Public-private partnership is what is going to control you if you allow sustainable development to continue. And here's what it looks like. There's business, they've got the money, there's government, and they're tossing you what they think that you should have. Special interests are there making sure that business and government are keeping to the agenda, and there's you waiting to get the crumbs from their table. That is not liberty, my friends. That is not liberty. That is literally subjugation, and that is where we're headed. Without sustainable development, you can still be a good steward of the earth. You can care for your fellow man, you can better yourself and others in the world. All you have to do is exercise personal virtue. Remember those questions at the very beginning of the talk. Who is best equipped to make decisions for your life? You or the government? And what job does government have to protect you or to protect your rights? Well, sustainable development would tell you, we're going to protect you. We're going to protect you by making sure that the earth is available for future generations. We're going to implement all of these fine policies to make sure that you and yours and future generations are protected. Well, the question is that protecting your rights? And the answer is no. If we insist that our elected officials protect our rights, we can better protect ourselves. That's our job, okay? Well, the prestige is the final act of a magic trick. It's not enough to make something disappear, for example. You have to bring it back again, right? The problem is the people who are trying to make your property rights disappear, they don't want to bring them back. They want them to be gone forever. So it's up to you to make sure that A, they don't disappear in the first place, or that if they have disappeared, they get brought back. And to do that, I really would encourage you to do a number of things, or to not do a number of things. First of all, don't automatically buy the marketing spin, and there's a lot of it. And this is part of how your elected officials are getting hoodwinked, because there's a ton of marketing that goes into selling this to them to make it sound good and make it sound wonderful so that they think that they are doing something valuable for you. Don't buy the marketing spin. Don't trust the consultants. Don't believe what comes out of the consensus building sessions. Go to city council and county board meetings. You know what? If you're not there, the bad things happen by default because there's nobody to stop them. Find out what your state government is doing and make sure that you're letting your elected representatives know there. Do your research, talk to your neighbors, talk to your elected officials, do the deep dive, figure out what is going on and act accordingly. My friends, you are the best hope that we have, and I look forward to seeing the good work that you will do to reverse the damage that has already been done by sustainable development to the system that keeps us free. Thank you so much for your attention.